Dr. Velthara Kess held the crystal fragment carefully in her four-fingered hands. Her pale blue skin shimmered under the laboratory lights as she studied the ancient device. She was a xenarchaeologist, someone who studied the remains of dead alien civilizations. For 30 years, she had dug through the ruins of forgotten worlds, but she had never found anything like this. The crystal came from Kepler-4, for 2b, a dead planet on the edge of known space. Most scientists thought it was just another barren rock, but Velthara had detected strange energy readings beneath its surface. After 3 months of careful excavation, she had found this data cache buried deep in what looked like the remains of an ancient research station now. As she connected the crystal to her analysis computer, she could barely believe what she was seeing. The device contained massive amounts of information about a species called humans, the Galactic Coalition. I'd heard stories about humans for thousands of years, but everyone thought they were just myths. Ancient legends spoke of a violent, warlike species that had once lived on a world called Earth, but no one had ever found proof they really existed. This crystal was different. It contained detailed star maps showing parts of the galaxy that the Coalition had never explored. There were cultural records describing human society, their technology, and their history. Most shocking of all, there were military files that made Velthara's blood run cold. "Korth, come look at this," she called to her research partner, a tall, insect-like being from the planet Zephyria. Korth clicked his mandibles nervously as he approached. "What have you found, Doctor?" Velthara pointed at the holographic display. Floating above her desk, these are tactical manuals. Military strategies from the humans. Look at this section about something called guerrilla warfare. Korth read the translated text, his compound eyes widening with each line. They fought wars against their own species. They developed weapons designed to kill other humans. "Not just kill," Velthara said quietly. "These documents describe psychological warfare, economic disruption, something called total war. They had strategies for destroying entire civilizations. The Coalition had built its peaceful empire on the principle that violence was the mark of a primitive species. Any race advanced enough to travel between stars must have evolved beyond such barbaric behavior. War was inefficient, costly, and ultimately self-destructive. The Coalition had grown for 3,000 years by offering trade, technology, and protection to less advanced species. Most worlds joined willingly, grateful for the benefits of galactic civilization. But these human documents suggested a completely different approach to interstellar relations. They described tactics for fighting enemies with superior technology, ways to turn a civilization's own strengths against them, and methods for winning wars through cunning rather than raw power. "This can't be real," Korth muttered. "No species could be this violent and still develop space travel. It would have destroyed themselves long before reaching the stars." Velthara continued reading, her hands shaking slightly. "There's more. Look at these historical records. They fought wars that lasted for years, sometimes decades. They had conflicts that involved their entire planet. And somehow, they survived all of it. The data described a species unlike anything. In Coalition records, humans seemed to thrive on conflict, using it to drive technological advancement and social evolution. They had developed their most sophisticated technologies, not for exploration or trade, but for warfare. Their greatest achievements had come from trying to kill each other more efficiently, Dr. Korth said, pointing at another section of the display. "Look at these coordinates." Velthara followed his gaze to a star map buried deep in the files. It showed the location of Earth, the supposed human homeworld. According to the data, it was located in a region the Coalition had marked as unexplored, a small yellow star system about 200 light-years from the nearest Coalition outpost. "We have to report this to the Science Council," Korth said. "If humans really exist, if they're still out there, ... "I know," Velthara replied, "but I'm not sure we should." She stared at the tactical manuals floating in the air before her. The humans had strategies for fighting enemies they had never encountered, weapons designed to work against unknown technologies, and contingency plans for scenarios that seemed impossible. It was as if they had been preparing for a war against the entire galaxy. What if the myths were warnings? She asked quietly. What if our ancestors encountered humans before, and the stories were meant to keep us away from them? Korth was silent for a long moment. You think they're still out there, after all this time? Velthera looked at the coordinates again. According to the data, Earth was located in a region of space that Coalition surveys had marked as unremarkable. No valuable resources, no signs of advanced civilization, nothing worth investigating. But what if that was exactly what the humans wanted them to think? I have to file my report, she said finally. The Science Council needs to know about this. But I have a feeling we're about to make a terrible mistake. As she began preparing her official findings, Velthara couldn't shake the image of those tactical manuals from her mind. Somewhere out there, in a forgotten corner of the galaxy, the most dangerous species in known history might still be waiting. And the Coalition was about to go looking for them. Captain Zethmer pressed his face against the observation window of the Coalition starship Unified Harmony. Below them spun a beautiful blue and green world, covered with swirling white clouds. After 3 weeks of travel following the coordinates from Dr. Velthara's discovery, they had found it. Earth was real. Captain, called Science Officer Quilara from her station. I'm reading over 8 billion life forms on the surface. They match the human biological markers from the ancient data files. Zethmer nodded, his 4 eyes wide with amazement. The myths were true. Humans actually existed, and they were still alive after all these thousands of years. He felt proud to be part of this historic moment. The Coalition would welcome these lost cousins back into galactic civilization. What's their technology level? He asked. Quilara studied her sensors carefully. Very primitive, sir. They're using nuclear fission for power, basic chemical rockets. For space travel, and simple satellites for communication. I'd estimate they're about 300 years behind Coalition standard technology. Perfect, Zethmer said with satisfaction. They'll be grateful for our help. Prepare the diplomatic shuttle. We'll land near their largest population center and offer them membership in the Coalition. The shuttle descended through Earth's atmosphere, passing over vast oceans and enormous land masses covered with cities. Zethmer was amazed by how many humans lived on this one world. Most Coalition species spread across multiple planets by the time their population reached such numbers, their translators identified the landing site as Seoul on something called the Korean Peninsula. As the shuttle touched down, in what appeared to be a ceremonial landing area, Zethmer straightened his formal diplomatic robes. This was the moment he had trained for his entire career. First contact with a lost human civilization. The shuttle doors opened, and Zethmer stepped out with full honors. His ceremonial guard flanked him, their polished armor gleaming in the alien sunlight. Behind them came the diplomatic team carrying gifts of Coalition. Technology and formal scrolls offering membership in galactic civilization, but something was wrong. Instead of crowds of amazed primitives staring at their first aliens, Zethmer found himself facing a small, organized group of humans. They stood in perfect formation, their clothes simple but clean, their faces calm and alert. There head stood a woman who looked to be in her middle years. Welcome to Earth, she said in perfect galactic standard. I am Ambassador Lee Hanna. We've been expecting you. Zethmer's translator worked perfectly, but her words made no sense. How could they have been expecting them? How did she know galactic? Standard. The Coalition had never made contact with this world before. Expecting us? Zethmer asked, trying to maintain his diplomatic composure. How is that possible? Ambassador Lee smiled, but Zethmer noticed that her eyes remained cold and watchful. Please, Captain. Let's discuss your intentions for our world. Behind her, the other humans remained perfectly still. Zethmer had dealt with many primitive species during his career, and they usually reacted to first contact with fear, wonder, or excitement. These humans showed none of those emotions. They watched the Coalition delegation like predators studying prey. Of course, Zethmer said, launching into his prepared speech. I am Captain Zethmer of the Galactic Coalition. We come in peace. To offer your species the benefits of advanced civilization. Your people have been isolated for too long. We can provide you with clean energy, advanced medicine, faster-than-light travel, and protection from hostile forces. As he spoke, Zethmer noticed more details that troubled him. Every human in sight stood with perfect posture and alertness. Their eyes constantly scanned the area, watching for threats. Even the youngest ones moved with discipline and control. These were not the movements of peaceful primitives. These were the movements of trained soldiers. "That's very generous," Ambassador Lee replied. "But we must decline your offer." "Decline?" Zethmer was confused. No primitive species had ever refused coalition membership. "Perhaps you don't understand the benefits we're offering. We can end disease, poverty, and war on your world. We can give you the stars themselves." "We understand perfectly," Captain Lee said. "We simply choose to remain independent." Quillara stepped forward and whispered urgently in Zethmer's ear. "Hey, Captain, I'm detecting massive energy signatures. Across the planet, power sources that shouldn't exist with their technology level." Zethmer felt a chill run through his body. "What kind of energy signatures? Military grade, sir? Weapon systems, defensive shields, and something else I can't identify?" Ambassador Lee continued smiling her cold smile. "Is there a problem?" "Captain, your technology," Zethmer said carefully. "Our sensors indicate you have capabilities beyond what we initially detected." "Oh yes," Lee replied casually. "We've learned it's best to appear less advanced than we actually are. It prevents misunderstandings." With visitors around the landing area, Zethmer began to notice other details he had missed. What he had taken for decorative elements were actually concealed weapons. The ground itself seemed to hum with hidden machinery. The very air felt charged with dangerous energy. "How long have you known about the Coalition?" he asked. "Long enough," Ambassador Lee said. "Long enough to prepare." The word prepare sent ice through Zethmer's veins. He looked around at the humans surrounding them, at their calm, patient faces, at their soldier-like bearing. This wasn't first contact with a primitive species. This was a trap, and they had walked directly into it. "I think," he said slowly, "we may have made an error in our assumptions about your people." Ambassador Lee's smile finally reached her eyes, but it was not a comforting expression. "Yes, Captain, I believe you have." Lehanna walked through the metal corridors deep beneath Sol, her footsteps echoing in the vast underground complex. 3 kilometers above her head, Captain Zethmer and his coalition delegation were probably still trying to understand what had just happened. Down here, in the heart of Earth's real command center, Hannah was preparing for war. The elevator descended. Another 50 meters, before opening into a massive chamber filled with holographic displays and hundreds of human operators. This was the Global Defense Command, hidden beneath the city for over 2 centuries. Every major city on Earth had a similar facility, all connected by quantum communication networks that the Coalition's primitive sensors couldn't detect. "Status. Report," Hannah said, as she approached the central command station. Colonel Park Ji-won looked up from his displays. He was a tall man with graying hair and the steady eyes of someone who had spent his entire life preparing for this moment. "Coalition fleet composition is exactly as predicted, Ambassador. 47 vessels in standard exploration formation. No battleships, no heavy cruisers, just science vessels and light escorts." Hannah nodded as she studied the tactical display, showing the Coalition ships orbiting Earth. Red dots marked each vessel, along with detailed information about their weapons, shields, and crew complement. The data was frighteningly accurate. "They still think we're primitives," Park continued. "Their defensive systems are barely active. They're treating this like a peaceful first contact mission." "How wrong they are," Hannah said quietly. She touched a control panel, and the display changed to show Earth's hidden defenses. What the Coalition saw as a primitive world was actually the most heavily defended planet in the known galaxy. Weapons platforms disguised as asteroids floated in the outer system. Underground missile silos dotted every continent. Orbital defense stations had been built inside. Hollow moons and space debris. The deception had begun 400 years ago when Hannah's great-grandfather, Admiral Lee Kyung-ho, had encountered the first Coalition scout ships near the edge of the solar system. Those early explorers had been captured and interrogated before they could report back to Coalition space. From them, humanity had learned about the galaxy's political structure, military capabilities, and expansion methods. The choice had been simple: join the Coalition as a junior member species, or prepare for the day when they would inevitably be discovered. Humanity had chosen preparation. Sir called out a young technician from across the command center. "We're receiving a transmission from Captain Zethmer. He's requesting an explanation for our energy signatures." Hannah smiled coldly. "Put him through on all frequencies. I want every Coalition ship to hear this." The main display flickered, showing Captain Zethmer's confused face. Behind him, Hannah could see Coalition officers frantically working at their stations. It's probably trying to understand how a primitive world had suddenly become the most dangerous place in their galaxy. Ambassador Lee Zethmer said, his voice tight. "With barely controlled panic, what is the meaning of this? Our sensors are detecting massive energy buildups across your planet. You said you were a peaceful species." "We are peaceful, Captain," Hannah replied calmly. "We've been living in peace for centuries. We've also been preparing. Preparing for what? For you." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Around the command center, human officers continued their work with quiet efficiency. They had trained for this moment their entire lives, as had their parents and grandparents before them. "Initiate Pale Horse Protocol," Hannah commanded. Across Earth's surface, hidden installations began powering up. The depths of the Pacific Ocean. Submarine bases released sleek vessels that had been waiting in the darkness for decades. In the asteroid belt, chunks of rock that had drifted harmlessly for years suddenly revealed themselves as fully armed warships, Captain. Zethmer's face went pale as his sensors detected the massive mobilization taking place around him. "Is impossible. You're supposed to be a primitive species. You don't have this kind of technology." "You don't have your technology, Captain," Hannah corrected him. "We have our own. And we've spent 4 centuries perfecting it specifically to deal with species like yours." The tactical display showed Coalition ships frantically trying to raise their defensive shields and power their weapons. But they were too slow, too soft from centuries of easy expansion. The humans had been watching them for 400 years, studying their weaknesses, planning for every possible scenario. "You see, Captain, you made one critical error," Hannah continued, her voice broadcasting to every Coalition vessel in the system. "You assumed we were the remnants of a dead civilization. Survivors clinging to life on a forgotten world. We're not. Sleeper ships that had been drifting through the outer solar system for decades suddenly came alive, their engines flaring as they moved to surround the Coalition fleet. Each one was staffed by humans who had been born in space, raised from childhood, to crew these vessels, waiting for the day when Earth would need them. We're not the remnants of anything," Hannah said, watching as the Coalition ships found themselves completely surrounded by a force they hadn't even known existed. "We're the ones who chose to disappear. We're the ones who've been watching you, learning about you, preparing for you." The command center fell silent except for the quiet hum of machinery and the soft voices of operators, coordinating the largest military operation in human history. 400 years of planning, 400 years of preparation, 400 years of waiting were finally coming to an end. "Welcome to Earth, Captain," Hannah said softly. "We hope you enjoy your stay." Major Kim Dae-ho floated in the command chair of his stealth ship, watching the Coalition fleet through his tactical display. 72 hours had passed since the first meeting on Earth's surface, and everything had changed. What started as a peaceful first contact had become something much darker. "Major," his communications officer called out, "we're receiving reports from all sectors. Coalition reinforcements are arriving throughout the system." Dae-ho nodded grimly. The Coalition commanders had finally realized their mistake. They were no longer dealing with primitive humans who would be grateful for their advanced technology. They were facing soldiers who had been preparing for this war for centuries, through his ship's sensors. Dae-ho watched as massive Coalition battleships dropped out of hyperspace. These weren't the light exploration vessels that had first arrived at Earth. These were military ships, armed with weapons that could destroy entire cities. The Coalition was done playing games. "Captain Yoon, what's your assessment?" Dae-ho asked. opening a channel to the stealth frigate Soul's Vengeance. Captain Yoon. Minji's voice came through clearly, despite being transmitted across several light minutes of space. They're predictable, Major. Everything they do follows standard military doctrine. Formations, attack patterns, defensive positioning. It's like they're following a textbook. A textbook we've been studying for 400 years, Daeho replied. During the 3 days since first contact, human intelligence teams had been analyzing every aspect of coalition military behavior. The results were disappointing. The coalition had grown soft during 3,000 years of easy expansion. Their military was designed for police actions and showing force to primitive species, not for fighting a real war. They fight like they're playing a game, Yoon continued. Or if they're all zozozos. Formations, predictable tactics. They've forgotten what war actually means. Daeho understood what she meant. The coalition military followed strict rules of engagement. They announced their attacks, gave warnings before firing, and tried to minimize casualties even among their enemies. They fought like civilized beings who expected their opponents to do the same. Humans fought to win. All units begin Phase 2 operations, Daeho commanded, across the solar system. Human forces that had been waiting and hiding began to move. Ships that had appeared to be asteroids on coalition sensors suddenly revealed their true nature as fully armed weapons platforms, stealth vessels that had been drifting through space. Like debris powered up their engines and weapons systems, but the real surprise came from outside the solar system entirely. For decades, human sleeper ships had been positioned throughout coalition space, disguised as trading vessels, research stations, and refugee transports. Their crews had lived normal lives, working regular jobs, raising families, and waiting for the signal that would activate them as military assets. That signal had been sent 3 days ago. Captain Lee Suman sat in what appeared to be a simple cargo hauler drifting near the coalition trade hub of Kepler Station. For 15 years, she had played the role of an independent merchant, buying and selling goods throughout coalition space. Her ship's cargo holds were filled with grain and manufactured products just like any other trader, but hidden beneath the cargo were weapon systems that could reduce Kepler Station to scrap metal within minutes. This is merchant vessel Peaceful Trader requesting docking clearance. She transmitted to the station using the same cheerful voice she had used for 15 years. A clearance granted, Peaceful Trader, came the response. Bay 7 is ready. For you. As her ship approached the massive space station, Suman activated hidden systems throughout her vessel. The cargo holds reconfigured themselves, revealing missile launchers and energy weapons. Her ship's gentle merchant exterior fell away like a mask, exposing the military vessel beneath. Similar scenes were playing out across coalition space. Human agents who had lived peaceful lives for decades were suddenly revealing themselves as soldiers. Trading posts became military bases. Refugee camps became command centers. Merchant vessels became warships. The coalition had no idea how deeply humans had infiltrated their society. Back in Earth's command center, General Oh Sung-won watched the reports flowing in from across the galaxy. Coalition trade routes were being systematically attacked. Military convoys found themselves ambushed by enemies who seemed to appear from nowhere. Entire star systems were being cut off from communication. Sir, reported his intelligence officer, we're receiving panic. Transmissions from 17 coalition worlds. They're requesting immediate military assistance. And how are the coalition forces responding? Oh asked. Exactly as predicted, sir. They're spreading their fleets thin, trying to protect every system at once. Classic defensive overextension. Nodded with satisfaction. The coalition was reacting exactly as human strategists had predicted they would. They were trying to fight a traditional war, protecting territory and following established military doctrine. But humans weren't fighting a traditional war. They were hunting. They expected gratitude, O told his staff, watching as another coalition patrol was destroyed by what appeared to be a simple asteroid. They offered us the privilege of serving them, and they can't understand why we declined. Every coalition ship that was captured provided more intelligence about their enemies' capabilities, psychology, and weaknesses. Humans weren't trying to destroy the coalition quickly. They were learning from them, studying them, understanding exactly how their enemy thought and fought. The coalition had ruled the galaxy for 3,000 years through superior technology and peaceful expansion. They had never faced an enemy that understood warfare as survival itself. The hunt had begun, and humanity had found its prey lacking. Former Coalition Supreme Chancellor Krathvin sat in his own council chamber, but everything had changed. The massive circular room with its gleaming walls and floating holographic displays now felt like a prison. Across from him sat Lihanna, the human ambassador who had brought his civilization to its knees in just 2 years. 2 years. That was all it had taken for humanity to dismantle an empire that had ruled the galaxy for 3,000 years. Krathman's 4 hands trembled slightly as he held the tablet containing the human terms for peace. His pale green skin had grown even paler during the long months of warfare, and his large eyes showed the exhaustion of a leader who had watched his entire world crumble. Your terms are reasonable, he admitted, though the words tasted bitter. In his mouth, Lihanna nodded calmly. She looked exactly the same as she had during that first meeting on Earth's surface, when he had still believed humans were primitive creatures who would be grateful for coalition protection. Wrong he had been. We don't want to rule your species, Chancellor, she said in her quiet, steady voice. We want coexistence. But coexistence requires mutual respect. Krathvan almost laughed at the irony. Mutual respect. The coalition had offered the humans membership, technology, and protection, expecting gratitude in return. Instead, they had unleashed a nightmare that had torn apart everything the coalition represented. The war had lasted 18 months, though calling it a war seemed wrong. Wars were fought between armies, with battles and clear front lines. This had been something else entirely. Humans had fought like ghosts, appearing everywhere and nowhere, striking targets that seemed impossible to reach, then vanishing before coalition forces could respond. Coalition worlds hadn't been bombarded from space or invaded by massive armies. Instead, their power grids had been systematically disabled. Their communication networks had been cut. Their leaders had been isolated and captured. Their military bases had been neutralized by enemies who seemed to know exactly where every weakness lay. The humans had demonstrated something terrifying. They could strike anywhere, anytime, against any target they chose. No coalition world was safe. No coalition leader was beyond their reach. No coalition military installation could protect itself against enemies who had been studying them for centuries. The myths about humans, Krathvan said quietly, staring at his reflection in the polished table surface. They were warnings, weren't they? Lihanna's expression didn't change, but something shifted in her eyes. Your ancestors encountered us once before, she confirmed. They were wise enough to leave us alone. Their descendants weren't. The revelation hit Krathvan like a physical blow. The ancient stories about humans hadn't been myths at all. Had been historical records, warnings passed down through generations about a species too dangerous to disturb. Somewhere along the way, those warnings had been forgotten or dismissed as primitive superstition. How long? He asked. How long have you been watching us? 400 years, Hannah replied. Ever since your scouts first entered our solar system, captured them, learned everything they knew about the coalition, and made a choice. Join your empire as a junior species, or we could prepare for the day when you would inevitably find us again. You chose war. We chose survival. Krathvan looked around the council chamber where he had once made decisions, affecting trillions of beings across thousands of worlds. He was signing surrender documents, agreeing to terms dictated by a species his people had considered extinct. The human terms were surprisingly mild. The coalition would continue to exist, but under new rules. No species would be forced to join. No world would be occupied against its will. The galaxy would be divided into regions of influence, with humans controlling their own territory, and The coalition governing the rest. But everyone would know the truth now. Everyone would understand that humanity was watching, waiting, ready to act if the old patterns of forced expansion ever returned. What happens now? Krathvin asked, as Hannah gathered her materials. She paused at the door, turning back to look at him one final time. Now you learn to share the galaxy with its apex predators. And we learn whether peaceful coexistence is actually possible. The words sent a chill through Krathvon's body. Apex predators. That's what humans were, and what they had always been. The coalition had spent 3 millennia believing they were the dominant species in the galaxy, expanding peacefully through superior technology and diplomatic pressure, but they had never been dominant. They had simply been allowed to exist because the real apex predators had chosen to remain hidden. The galaxy is large enough for all of us, Chancellor, Hannah continued. But understand this. Earth was never a myth. We were never extinct. We're just waiting to see what kind of neighbors you would be. The door closed behind her with a soft hiss, leaving Krathvon alone in the vast chamber. Outside the windows, he could see coalition ships returning to port, their crews defeated and demoralized. The comfortable order his species had known for. Millennia was over, humanity had awakened, and the galaxy would never be the same. He looked down at the peace treaty one more time, reading the human signature at the bottom. Hannah had signed it simply, without ceremony or flourish. Just a name on a document that changed everything. The age of human dominance had begun. And Krathvin could only hope that his species would be wise enough to learn from their ancestors' warnings this time.